I don't believe that we're meant to know all the answers. But I believe that we are back again because why do some people have such difficult lives and such? And I think we're here to learn to improve ourselves. But people are so handicapped where they can't do anything. Then they said, this person said, they're so elevated, they're so high that they've learned everything there is to learn. And the people who look after them are blessed to be looking after people who have such elevated souls.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode.
Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. My name is Bob Nickman. My guest today is Vonnie Eichel. Working as an exercise therapist in a psychiatric facility, Vonnie met a man named Henry who was an arsonist, a sex offender, and a psychopath. This became the catalyst to Vonnie's enlightenment. We're going to be talking about this powerful true story that is her new book, A Reason to Carry On. But first, I'd like to invite you to visit my website, theexplodinghuman.com. Over there, you can listen to episodes, read synopses, see photos of my guests, read a little bio on myself. There's also a YouTube channel where you can listen. That is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. As I said, my guest today is Vonnie Eichel. We journey to the UK to talk to her and her eclectic, circuitous route to becoming an exercise therapist working with people that were confined to psychiatric facilities, and her work with the elderly and other folks with disabilities, and how this led to her exploring the big question, what is the meaning of life and how do we find it, especially in these situations that are extremely dire. Vonnie is a wonderful woman, and I really enjoyed talking to her about this. And of course, our most profound questions come up. I'm going to jump right into this thing. This is author Vonnie Eichel, talking about her new book, A Reason to Carry On. Good morning, Vonnie. It's so great to talk to you, and we had a little chat before, and we're going to get into some great stuff. I can tell. You're in London. I'm in Los Angeles, and the internet has worked its magic one more time so that we can meet and be together here for an hour or so and talk about all things Vonnie Eichel. And I got your name pronounced correctly. So let's tell the folks how what you do and how that transpired.
Well, I'm a writer now and writing about my experiences. But what I wrote about happened 20 years ago. And when I was teaching exercises to people with special needs. And that's not how I started off in life. I had, first of all, I'm from New York. I might not sound it anymore, but I am.
Oh, okay.
And I was a university dropout because I married very young.
Good for you. We like our dropouts.
Yeah, well, I married in haste and repented at leisure. But I had two wonderful daughters, and I did a lot of studying, and I did looking for different careers. And the only thing I really liked doing was exercising and then going to ballet class. I discovered ballet and I became impassioned by it. But I didn't know what to do. I was looking at different careers. I was a tour guide. I was in the stock exchange, and you name it, I did it. My daughter said to me once, "Oh, Mommy, why don't you learn systems analysis and computer programming?" So I did it. I don't know why, but I did it. But it was the furthest from my thought. But what happened to me was I decided to follow some people roller skating one day, and a voice said to me, "Don't do it." Well, we were there for a few hours, so I did. I didn't listen to my inner voice. I broke my leg rather badly, and I was laid up for 1 year. Now, someone with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, you stick them in, they can't go out and do anything. It was a miserable, miserable time for me. But I also learned what it meant to be incapacitated, debilitated, having to be in a chair with people looking down on you, and terrible pain. And then I was looking out of my window and I couldn't see very far. And across the street, I'd been living in that apartment for a very long time, but it was a nursing home. And then something clicked and I thought, my God, I know exactly how these people are feeling. And I always said, if I had my life to do again, I would become a dancer. So put the two together, and I liked spirituality and I liked health. So I decided that's my calling, to become an exercise therapist for the elderly, disabled, and people with special needs. And then we come to my book. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, it was a
short question.
No, I was just taking it in and thinking, well, the universe was conspiring to get you to follow your intuition.
Yes,
because you had some strong beliefs that were actually holding you back from the things that you really were meant to do. And it took an accident such as that and a confinement to force you to really look inward and find the thing that was your passion. So the accident, was it a bad thing? Maybe not.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I'm sure it was horrible that year. It must have been awful. But
it was horrible and painful, but it was a turning point in my life, not just for that, but for everything, because I stopped running. And when you stop running, you start thinking and looking at your life differently. And I think that's a lot of, if someone said, oh, what's the best advice someone would give you? And I would say, just be and listen and, stop running away. And anyway, I was working in different nursing homes and retirement homes. And then I was asked to work in a hostel for psychiatric ex-offenders. And they weren't really keen to exercise. They were very keen to talk. And they seemed to like me and confide in me, I guess like you do your hairdresser or something. But one of them came in late always and stayed later. And I didn't know at the time. I knew they all had been in prison and I knew they all had psychiatric problems, but I was never told anything else about him. I found out only subsequently that he was diagnosed as a violent psychopath. He was a rapist, he was an arsonist, he was illiterate, and he was a drug addict. But he was a catalyst for my opening my eyes and why I wrote the book. Because he told me a story that he went to a pub and he fell on the road. And a girl came and put her hand out to try to help him up. And he turned to me and he said, what's the point? I get up just to fall down again, up and down, just like a yo-yo. I might as well just continue fixing. And for someone who didn't have much of an education, was illiterate, and really had a tough time in life because he himself was violent, people have a lot more depth than one realizes. And then he opened my eyes and think, yes, what's the point of this life of his? And then I thought, well, what about all the other people I work with? I was working at least 4 classes a day, 5 days a week. And the common thread that linked them all was they were all disadvantaged in some way or other. And then I said, well, what is the point of their lives or our lives or the meaning in life? And that's what inspired me.
So this man who obviously was incredibly disadvantaged, probably since childhood, and had wound up in a psychiatric prison hospital, essentially.
Only because they didn't know where else to put him. He was a big troublemaker. They couldn't find where to put him.
Right. Exactly. And you saw some well, you saw a lot of humanity in this person, and yet he was a dangerous person.
Bob, it's very interesting because I questioned myself then. Because afterwards we were together for quite a while, and then I went on vacation, and then I came back, and he wasn't the same. I couldn't get him back to what he was. And I always wondered to myself now, and I keep thinking and asking myself things. One thing we know about psychopaths, they're very manipulative. But I don't believe that he was manipulative at that point with me. Yes, he wanted to get someone to help him out and be friendly, and that was manipulative. He did it. He stayed in class late, and he got me to help him. But there was something about him that was really beautiful. And I was teaching him how to read. I'd make these tapes of Elvis Presley records and write them all out for him. And he was in helping himself, and then he was trying to help others. And so it makes me wonder, what is it? Was it in remission, the psychopath side? Or what was it? We're learning. We have to question ourselves all the time and really think, because there's so much there, so many lessons for us to learn all the time.
And when you said you couldn't get him back, when you left, he was starting to progress in a certain way, and then you came back and he just was shut down and wouldn't open up.
Absolutely.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, I used to meet him because I was let go from the hostel because I told them that one of my students gave me a kiss on the cheek, and apparently they said that was dangerous. It was a very innocent thing. I thought it was a lovely thing, but apparently with them that was dangerous. And when this fellow, I called him Henry in the book, was told, he said, I'm going to start breaking tables and chairs. You have to see me. What am I going to do? So I saw him outside. I'd meet him in a place in London called Covent Garden, which he'd never been to before, because he was from the East End of London and this was the West End. So I took him there. I took him out for something to eat. And I even took him, it was his birthday, I took him to see My Fair Lady. And he was so warm, and he was a pleasure to be with. And I never felt that I was, with someone who was violent or that compromised in any way. And yet, when we met again after I'd been away on vacation, he was, for give you an example, we went to a restaurant. He started screaming out, "Where's my food?" Nothing was ever good enough for him. I just couldn't relate with him at all. Whatever I did wasn't good enough.
I wonder are there people, and I think there are people that are so damaged they're beyond help in a sense, or maybe that's not true. Maybe that's a little cold, but are there people that are wired in ways that they cannot be helped just because of how they come in, whether it's genetic or, brain wiring? I'm not sure. I mean, it's an interesting idea that is evil created, which most of the time it is. But then are there people that just come in and they're just wired in a way that they cannot be helped no matter what?
This is exactly what I look at in my book. And just to go back to the hostel, he wasn't the only one who had problems. And, I never felt that I was I was in a room alone with these men, and they'd all been violent and they'd done some terrible things. I'll give you an example about one person. He was 9 years old when his brothers and his father turned him into a rent boy, put him into prostitution. And he committed a robbery. And because of the mitigating circumstances of his background, the judge reduced the sentence. So I met him in the hostel, and he was full of cut marks all over his arm. And he was such a sweet person, and he used to tell me he's evil, he's no good. Whatever I said, wouldn't make a difference. And he was really a lovely person. And I thought there was more hope with him. And then he had someone introduced him to a girl, and they had a relationship, and she came to live in the hostel with him. in his room, and then they got other accommodation. But she was as badly damaged as he was. That's another point that I'm making, because people who are damaged, they seek out people who are damaged themselves, so they find people. And also, when you're brought up in a excuse me, I just want to put in, I'm not a professional in any way, shape, or form. I was an exercise therapist, and I did a university course in behavioral psychology. But I'm not qualified. But what I am qualified is when I was in the behavioral psychology class, every time they had a new syndrome, I would put my hand up. Yes, I had someone exactly who fit that description. So when you asked me, I go in the book, A Reason to Carry On, I tell about these different people. So people get an indication of their lives and how difficult it is for them. For instance, one person was sectioned because he was an alcoholic and life was difficult for him. And he came back clean, and he was buying sodas. And then when you throw them back into the hostel where people are on drugs and drinking and etc., what hope is there? But that's aside from your environment. But one thing I learned from behavioral psychology is also that when we're born, we have 50% of who we are. Our behavior is laid out at conception. So really, how much free will do we have in many respects? But going back to your question again about people in their lives, yes, I believe people can change. And I think it's a slow process, but we can change if you do it focused. Even people with a damaged brain, when you have a stroke or whatever, there's ways for the brain it goes around the damaged area, and you can. But there's some people, for instance, psychopaths, or I don't want to say, but all these different disorders, it's very difficult. And also people who are brought up in deprived circumstances. When we go back to conception, first of all, you've got your behavior laid out for you. And then if you're abused, or you're in the middle of people who are shouting and screaming, and you're not well fed, and there's just not a kind atmosphere, your brain, which is developing that time, is plastic. And it's developing to what it's imbuing from all this atmosphere. So people who grow up in deprived areas and in deprived circumstances, their brains form differently than people who grow up on Fifth Avenue. It's very different for them. And their perceptions are different. For instance, it's very important to them how people perceive them or respect. And what they think is respect, you and I might not agree with that, but if someone looks at them in a strange way, or if someone bumps into them, this whole idea of respect, and their brain functions differently than people who have not had different circumstances in life. So it's very, very difficult. And what they really need is someone to love them. There's a story about someone who was in prison for years and years and years, and he is violent. And out of the blue, somehow a daughter came and contacted him. Maybe he never met her before, and his life changed. So you do get this all the time. But I think the one thing in life is love.
Yeah, that does seem to be the core of any type of successful life, is to have feel safe and to have love. You know, and the other sort of natural instinct that we all have is survival. So if you're in a violent, chaotic situation as a kid, and your survival tools are to be aggressive, violent in order to protect yourself, then you move into the world with those things. It's, fairly obvious that, and then, to reprogram that, because it's
not only that,
mm-hmm.
but not only that, but then they self-soothe themselves. And how do they do it? Even at teenagers, they start with drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and where does that get them? But that's why I believe, I was telling you that I believe in spirituality. I believe that or religion. I believe there's something greater than ourselves. What if someone's very ill? What do you have? What can you do? You do your best. You go to the best doctors you can. But what can you do for yourself? And that's why I think that there is something greater than ourselves. And that's the only salvation that we have, that to believe in that there's someone there for our greater good, and just by being the best person that we can be in life. And the other thing, when we were saying about love, sorry, I'm talking so much.
Oh, I love it. It's less work for me.
I'll send you my bill.
You're a great guest. I just sit back and just enjoy everything you're saying. I love
it. And, you don't have to be loved by another person. You have to love yourself. And that's where it all begins, which isn't always easy. It isn't always easy to love yourself. I learned that a long time ago. I went to a course in psychosynthesis, and we were told to look in the mirror and say, I love you, Vani. I couldn't do it. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't do it. And it took me 3 weeks. And that's something I try to tell people who have a problem, that if you look in the mirror for 3 weeks and you tell yourself how much you love yourself, you do in the end. It does work. And that's so important, because if you love yourself and respect yourself, then you wouldn't do something that wouldn't be good or right. But they weren't the only people I worked with. I worked also with people with other psychological problems and psychiatric problems, and also the elderly and disabled, people who are on the last furlong of their lives. And sometimes you think, oh, well, when we get older, we get wiser. Not always.
My father was in an assisted living the last 2 or 3 years of his life. Mm-hmm. So I was around a lot of that myself. And it was interesting to see people that had gotten older. Most of these people were 90, give or take 10 years. And some of them had come to a place where they did seem wiser and calmer, and other people, their personality and characteristics had become exaggerated in the negative way. So, there was a lot of, it's interesting to watch people get older to see how they handle it. Now,
they say when you get older, you get more of what you really are.
Uh-oh. Yeah. Well, it seems like that, because you do see people that, like older people in particular, they'll be on a topic and they won't be able to get off of it, because it's more of, that thing that interested them when they were younger, and they just can't not do it. I was walking home the other day, and this older woman was who I've never seen before. She was getting her mail, and she started talking to me, and I just knew as I'm talking to her that she doesn't have a lot of people to talk to. And she was talking about the mail carrier and the deliveries and which days they come, and some of the problems she's having with mail. That was monumentally uninteresting to me. However, she needed to talk to somebody. I could feel it. So I stayed there and I listened to her. I just listened to her. And I felt pretty good. I am patting myself on the back for having the instinct to realize it wasn't about the content of the conversation. She just wanted to connect. And I know that you talk about that in your work, in your book, about the importance of that type of connection and what actually happens between people. That's like a healing force that has nothing to do with anything other than just love and connection and some sort of a feeling that you belong to something bigger, but it's through other people.
There was one particular person, and she was very aggressive, and she was rude to everyone, and she was nasty, and she was just an impossible person. And in the home as well, there was someone, and she was always shouting at her and saying, you're disgusting, you're this and that. And the woman was always stripping. I was only there once a week for an hour, and yet I can tell you, I knew her whole anatomy because she had this disorder that made her take off all her clothes. And so one day I turn up there, and this woman who was so violent against her and abusive, they were sitting together holding hands. And the one that was always stripping, she kept her clothes on most of the time. And they were together, and it was such a wonderful thing to see, because the aggressive woman, she started treating her as, her long lost daughter. And there was real love and contentment between them. And I found that with one or two others too. They might have been aggressive and nasty in the beginning, and then they found someone to put their feelings onto and look after them. The other person couldn't even speak perhaps, but they needed someone to give that affection to. In psychiatry or psychology, there was never an idea of that the mind and the body are together. Plato knew it over 2,000 years ago. Freud knew it. And, and even John Milton knew it. But they don't, when you go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, they deal with the mind. They don't understand that the body, they didn't, now they are. Things are changing now, and it's coming around. But it's very strange, isn't it? Only in these last 10 years or so that people realize how the mind and body work together. And you can't separate the two. Because even like in grief, when someone dies, physiologically, their body can't cope for 2.5 to 3 years. It takes time for the body to get over grief, because our cells have memories. And very often how we behave or react to something is in the cells of our body, within our muscle memory.
Like when you think you're walking around, maybe you're tight in your shoulders, let's say, because you're somebody that feels like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, or whatever it is. You're tight in your chest, or, you're having stomach issues. A lot of that stuff is tied to those kinds of memories and experiences. And if you want to call it trauma, it could be trauma, could just be, whatever. But that stuff is really amazing. And that's why I love certain types of body work when it's integrated with the what you're talking about, with the psychological makeup of a person.
When people have problems, the one thing that you notice is there's a disconnect between their bodies and themselves. And also there's a disconnect with them and their community, for instance. And when they get into exercise classes or do things together with people, things change. And because for me, ballet was a metaphor for a perfect life. Not just ballet, but any sport that's done professionally, or something that's really done well, or any exercise is really done well. Because what does it entail? It's everything. Body, mind, and spirit. It's psychology, it's physiology, it's emotions, it's it's everything that you could think of. And you have to be so focused, and you have to be so disciplined and control, and it's technique. It's everything. To do something well, you have to use it all, put it all together. I don't believe that we're meant to know all the answers. But I believe that we are back again, because why do some people have such difficult lives and such? And I think we're here to learn to improve ourselves. But people are so handicapped where they can't do anything. Then this person said, they're so elevated, they're so high that they've learned everything there is to learn. And the people who look after them are blessed to be looking after people who have such elevated souls. But one thing that I feel that I really learned a long time ago, and also from my work, is that receiving is in the giving. Only, when you come to someone's life, would you say, oh, they went to lots of parties, or they ate well, or they traveled well, or no, that's not what it is. It's what you did for other people, what you did to do, through giving. And one thing I must say, with all the people I worked with, I got so much out of it, more than they did, I bet, I'm sure, because first of all, I was on stage, I was performing, I was giving the best of myself, prancing around the room, trying to motivate them and all that. But I saw people who were stooped and bent over in their chairs. And all of a sudden, when I left, they were smiling. And I always did my exercises based on ballet technique. And to see them using their arms gracefully or stretching out their feet or leg properly. And it was just the greatest joy and the greatest pleasure. And, you know, they say there's the light. People talk about light. What is that light? And one day I came to see that light. I felt as if all of a sudden, and I started crying because I felt this is what it was all about. You know, this giving, because that's when you get so much back, when you see that you make other people happy.
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced that, even though I think my default setting is to be self-centered, but sometimes I have to actually fight that because I know the results of being more thinking about the other person it's a more pleasing result. Well, let's talk about your book a little bit, and so people can get this book and really find out this amazing story.
Yes, it's called A Reason to Carry On, and it's on Amazon.
It's a real story.
All real. Names have been changed to protect the innocent, so to speak. But it's all true.
And is it all about this character or this name changed person, Henry, or it's other people too?
No, he was the one who was the catalyst to make me look at these other people's lives and wondering, what is it all about? And then I bring in the behavioral psychology that I learned. And also, for instance, I look at twin studies. Do you know that, I don't know if you're familiar with twin studies, but when they took, for instance, there was one person, a lot of them, and they were separated at birth. And then they didn't even know that they had a twin. And then late in life, when they found out, not only did they marry wives with the name Betty, they went on vacation the same place, they had the same hobbies, they were, it just went on. They had the dog was the same name. They both would, it was amazing. Everything was exactly the same. And, it's just amazing that so much of us is already predetermined.
Yeah, so I wonder, is it this predetermined thing that they're going to develop along the same lines, or is it a psychic connection? No matter where they are on Earth, they are so joined in some energetic psychic way that they develop in a parallel ways. I wonder.
That's interesting because I never thought of it that way. And it wasn't explained to me when I did it, when I learned the course, etc. But no, that's very possible because, as I said, I think there's much more than we know or that we should know, perhaps. For instance, how would you define music? How would you define art? How would you define love? It's different for each of us. And the same thing about putting meaning into your life. We have to do it for ourselves.
Yeah, as a guy I interviewed about a year ago, he said I was in a room, I was destitute, I didn't have, he had pretty much had nothing, and he goes, and I realized the cavalry is not coming. I'm going to have to do this myself.
Yeah, some of us learn helplessness, and I talk about that in the book also, helplessness. And waiting for someone to come and save us. But it doesn't happen. We have to do it all ourselves. In the book also, I write about, there was someone called Joanne Hara, and she was a best-selling author in the 30s and the 40s. It went in, and everyone was buying this book. And it was child rearing. And to bring up children in Germany, they were encouraged that to be tough and strong, that parents should be told not to pick up your child. Let them cry. Don't touch them. All these things. And to get a super race, Well, what happened was, well, we saw the result of it, a lot of it. And also, those people, it's not just them, but their children and their grandchildren, their great grandchildren suffered as a result. They were affected by that. So, what happens to us in life isn't just affecting us for that generation, but it's a generational thing that continues and continues and continues.
Challenge is to not be afraid and to trust the instincts, even though what's being told to you doesn't feel right. To just go, I'm not doing that, or that does feel right, and I am going to do it.
But it doesn't matter that we make mistakes. We're only human. We all make mistakes. As long as we realize that, I think it's so nice when it's to be humble and to know, yes, I made a mistake. I was wrong. And to be able to say, yes, I was wrong and I made a mistake is a very big thing.
I can't wait to do that when I make my first mistake. I haven't done that yet. I was hoping you'd laugh a little bit harder at that.
I was smiling.
It was a modest chuckle, but I was hoping for a bigger guffaw. I want to thank you so much for your time. You're lovely. And that's an English word. Lovely, they say over there. And yes, folks, Vonnie Eichel has this great book that you you should. If you are so inclined to purchase it and read it, you will be pleasantly, expanded. Let's put it that way.
I hope so.
Pleasantly expanded. Thank you for all your great work that you're doing and following your intuition and being who you are.
Thank you so much.
Have a beautiful day, Vonnie. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Much appreciation for you folks listening to The Exploding Human. Check out the website, theexplodinghuman.com, the YouTube channel, The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Once again, I want to thank Vonnie Eichel for visiting the show. Really love talking to her. Hope you guys have a fantastic day. Thank you.